All right, it appears we are broadcasting live to the world on YouTube, so we will go ahead and get started. I'll call together the April 22nd meeting of the Transportation Policy Committee. We have a very full agenda today, so we're going to try to move as quickly as possible. Amanda's informed me that she's taking roll call via electronic, so we will dismiss with actually calling names. The first item on the agenda is approval of the February 2021 TPC meeting minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a motion. You can either make the motion verbally or raise your hand. We'll do a roll call, and you can either do it verbally or raise your hand. That way you don't have to keep turning on and off your mute buttons. Make it a little bit easier, and I'll call for the same thing if you're opposed. So we'll be watching the screen for those actions. So looking for a motion and a second on the minutes.
I make the motion.
So I'll make a second, Barry.
Motion and a second. Any discussion or correction to the minutes? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye or raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item is public comment period. Greg, do we have any public commenters?
No public comments, no comments received before by email either.
All right, moving then forward to public involvement report. We'll stay with Greg.
All right, thank you all very much. I've got a small report here just to break down what we've been going on the last few months since we last met in February. All right. As most of you all know, our main focus since our last TPC meeting has been on the MTP update and the outreach efforts made in the first of 4 public outreach efforts for the update to the MTP. We're going to hear more in detail from Elizabeth Fark later in the meeting, but I wanted to touch on some of the key numbers. We were able to continue our presentations to groups across the MPO region that we began in February. Since our last TPC meeting in February, we've held 21 more MTP presentations with interested groups. And as you can see from this list, we were able to hit some key areas. We were able to go to Portland, West Louisville, Southern Indiana, Bullitt, Prospect, everywhere in between. We spoke to specialty groups like hiking clubs, planning organizations, community interest groups, planning partners. We talked to the TARC road supervisors and safety teams, spoke with Rotary clubs, business councils, just trying to get a good feel on what kind of issues they were facing in transportation daily with their commute. Those efforts combined with our social media outreach strategy produced 771 total pin drops on our interactive map. Of those 771 pin drops, 691 of those pins left a comment. Our survey results saw over 200 returns. The important thing is the map continues to remain open for general comments, and we'll continue to log those comments as they come in. Currently this month, we have been promoting the map across our social media channels so the public can continue to engage and leave comments and concerns. That will take me on to my next slide. There's a lot of terms we use in the report when it comes to social media and website analytics, along with our email campaigns. So I thought I'd take a few minutes to explain the terms, what they mean, so you can have a better understanding of the numbers, why they're important, and why we collect them. Biggest thing is when it comes to measuring the success of a post, we take 2 key factors into consideration: an impression and an engagement. Impression is simply a measure of how many times the paid or organic, meaning not paid, content has been displayed in front of an online audience. Showed up on their feed or in their timeline, depending on which platform you're talking about. In engagement, it's as simple as social media engagement measures the public's shares, the likes, comments for an online business, or for us, in our case, KIPTA, in our social media efforts. So that way we know how many people are liking our stuff, seeing it, commenting on it, whatever. When it comes to website analytics, there are some terms we use to measure success. We use a thing called a unique visit, which is when a user goes to that site just once during the time frame that we're measuring from. So let's say you go to kipta.org or KYTC like 10 times during the day. If we were able to pull the analytics from that day, it's just going to show that one time that person visited compared to that 10. Gives you kind of a truer sense of what we're looking for. And that way we know how many people are actually checking out our website. It's not being inflated. Lastly, it's our email campaigns. We use MailChimp, and with that, we're able to look at how many people opened the email, how many people clicked on the link, so we know how successful it was. when we send these things out. We have a large email campaign that we send out. Numbers are over in the thousands, so we know how many people are actually viewing it, clicking on the links with it. We know the success of it. Biggest thing is, probably the biggest question is why collect it? Simple reason is COVID forced us kind of into a digital world when it came to outreach. So this way we're able to interact with the public in different ways so we can make sure the message is getting there. By studying the numbers, we can see what succeeded. It's been able to strengthen our content, increase our engagement, and our outreach. With that, I'll go to my next slide, which will actually break down the numbers and show everything there. All right. So as you can see, this is for the Division of Transportation. We had 17 organic posts on Facebook. With those 17 posts, we had over 6,000 views on our feeds and over 200 people liking, sharing, or commenting. So those are really good. We did 2 paid posts where we highlighted the survey and the map for the MTP update. We were able to target specific regions, special interest people, groups, and people that had liked certain things related to transportation. Those numbers were really encouraging. You can see we had over 7,700 people saw it in their news feed with almost 300 engagements. Twitter saw similar numbers to Facebook and Instagram, saw similar numbers to Facebook. Instagram, we also only measures impressions. We saw some good numbers, especially when you consider the post. Instagram it's a photo-based app for ones that don't know that. And so while we use it, it's sometimes not always a great platform for our engagements. It doesn't have the ability to put links in, those kind of things. So we don't always use it for those type of things. But with the 7 posts that we were doing in the month of March, those are really decent numbers. 263, we're really happy with it. Our website traffic remains consistent from last month. Transportation has a lot of pages. So our main focus is just on the main page of transportation, the tip, and the NTP. You can see the numbers there, 293 for transportation, 226 for unique visits in the tip page, and the MTP saw 211. Last thing I do want to mention is we're in the middle of the public comment period for Amendment 3. Public meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, the 27th at 5 o'clock. And if you need more information on that, be found on the KIPTA website. That will conclude my report for this month. I will take any questions if need be.
Thank you, Greg. Any questions? All right, seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to performance measure resolution. Andy Rush.
Thank you, sir. Late last year, both KYTC and NDOT had the opportunity to update several of their statewide performance measures, and they took that opportunity to do so. What this was they had a 4-year period, performance period, as it's known, that began back in 2018, concludes in 2022, and they had an option to update some of those 4-year targets in 2020. So both states did so. As you all probably recall, KIPTA sets regional targets on the majority of those, and so those did not impact us directly. There was one in each state that does impact us, known as Interstate Truck Travel Time Reliability Index, TTTR. NDOT and KYTC both raised that target. Coincidentally, they raised that index value up to the same number, 1.30. And NDOT in particular has asked that each MPO across Indiana prepare a resolution to provide to NDOT to reaffirm the MPO's commitment toward achieving those statewide goals. So that's the request here today, is for the KIPTA MPO, the KIPTA TPC, to reaffirm our commitment to the Truck Travel Time Reliability Index value in both Kentucky and Indiana. And that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but short and sweet today on this one.
Okay, any questions of Andy? All right, action is requested here, so need a motion and a second, please.
So moved. Motion approved.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Opposed, same sign. That item is approved. Continuing, moving on, quarterly review of MPO dedicated funding programs. Nick Vale. Nick?
Yes, sorry, this is my first time presenting from Kipta's office. Can you guys hear me all right? Okay. Right on. So yeah, this is just our kind of normal quarterly update of all of our NPO dedicated programs. As you can recall, in Indiana, we've got 4 funding programs. They are listed here: the CMAC program, HSIP, STBG, and Transportation Alternatives, or TA program. In Indiana, we're really wrapping up the end of fiscal year 2021. The fiscal year ends in June, but they really close their books, I would say, the first week of May. So we're getting really close. And as you can see, we've only got $300,000 that's unobligated in the CMAC program. And Justin Tackett from Floyd County has told me that they are on track to get those funds obligated for the right-of-way phase of the Charlestown Road Complete Streets project. The other project that is still unobligated but soon to be obligated is the PE phase for Jeffersonville and Clarksville's multimodal project that spans Montgomery Avenue and 9th Street under I-65. And so they, I think, are any day now should be obligating those funds. So we're on target to obligate 100% of our funds in Indiana in fiscal year 21, which is important because obviously we cannot carry those funds over in Indiana. Any questions about Indiana project status for 2021? All right, moving on to Kentucky. In the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, we started the year with about $58 million programmed. Obviously, that's almost 3 years worth of fiscal year allocations for us, and obviously, I think it's well known that we have a large carryover balance that we're trying to cut into. In the last week, we just obligated another $1 million. So if you saw this presentation last week at TTCC, the amount obligated has risen by about $1 million. I believe it's the design phase of the River Road Extension project for Louisville Metro. Those funds were obligated. And we have not had any shifts yet. Folks do feel like they're on target. Obviously, for this program, our goal is to obligate at least $21 million, which helps us avoid growing that carryover balance. But of course, anything above and beyond that is icing on the cake and helps us kind of cut down our balance and show that we're good stewards of the money we receive from the federal government and from KYTC. In the Transportation Alternatives Program, we started with $2.3 million. We have not had any obligations as of yet, but I've heard of several that are upcoming. And so I anticipate that number will grow considerably in the next 3 or 4 months. And I have a good feeling we'll probably hit that $1.3 million target that we're looking for, so we do not grow that carryover balance in Kentucky. Any questions there about Kentucky project status? All right. Next, we do have some action. We received cost increases in both states. However, we had to delay the Indiana cost increases while we worked a couple things out, and we'll bring those back to you all next month. So these are the cost increases that we have received to date from Kentucky project sponsors. These were all included in your handout or in your packet. The first two are basically project closeouts for 2 KYTC projects that are currently open to the public. Some additional funds were needed to pay off the final bills there. And then Louisville Metro had 5 segments of the Olmsted Parkways project along Algonquin and Southern that needed some additional design money for, they are moving into phase 2 design on that. CMAC funds were originally used to pay for phase 1 design of that larger project. There's actually 9 total segments. And then the last one is U of L's campus improvement projects, where they are working on some pedestrian improvements in and around 3rd and 4th Street to help kind of corral folks and make things as safe as they can be. So a minor amount of design funds were needed. I can take any questions before asking for action, if there are any. All right. Not hearing any questions, TPC action is requested to approve the cost increases that were listed on the slide and in the packet.
Thank you, Nick. Need a motion and a second on this item, please.
Motion, Bernie.
I'll second. Carrie Butler.
All right, have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Unified Planning Work Program, Amanda.
Thank you, Chairman. The MPO is required each year by federal regulation to outline all our funding and our planned activities for the upcoming fiscal year in a Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP. In our draft fiscal year 22, UPWP was provided to both states and TARC, and it's been revised based on all comments received. We put that revised document in the meeting, linked it in the meeting packet for you to check out. It gives assurances that we're going to meet all those federal planning regulations and all the usual suspects, maintaining the TIP, maintaining the MTP. Notable this year is a special project to obtain a new project database. But as is the case every April, TPC approval is needed for our fiscal year 22 UPWP in order for us to enter into agreements with both states for all of our MPO operational funding. I'd be glad to take any questions about the document and do ask for TPC approval.
All right, any questions for Amanda? Seeing and hearing none, need a motion and a second to approve.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second. Carrie Butler.
All right, have a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Opposed, same sign. Item is approved. Moving on to KYTC shift process. Andy.
All right, thank you very much. Trying to share my screen. It looks like it's disabled. So Amanda, can you
I will
share
first
yours?
I'll first try to give you access, Andy, assuming you
Okay.
prefer that. And then if not, I'll be glad to share for you.
Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit here while we're trying that. Last meeting, I came to speak to you guys about the KYTC shift process and KIPTA's MPO's role in that process. And it's been a crazy couple months, crazy couple weeks, perhaps even. And so now today we're ready to present the projects to be sponsored by the KIPTA MPO. Looks like it's working now. And I've got a little presentation to share with you guys. All right, here we go. So just as a reminder, SHIFT is KYTC's process that they use to a qualitative, quantitative, data-driven, it's all best of all the worlds process to feed projects into their highway plan. So this is the kind of the first cut, if you will, on the road to the 2022 KYTC highway plan. How they do that is with sponsorships, project sponsorships. So a number of projects get sponsored, and by sponsorship, and this by that we mean that these projects are the group of projects that will get scored through the qualitative process that's going to happen later this summer. So KYTC's District 5 gets 67 projects that they can sponsor, putting them through the scoring ringer I just mentioned. KIPTA MPO gets 49, and then for what it's worth, KIPTA Ad gets an additional 20. So there's 67. The District 5s is spread over their 8-county district. The KIPTA MPO is 49, is just over Bullitt, Jefferson, and Oldham. And then the KIPTA Ad has, for the 4 rural counties in the KIPTA region, 20 projects. It's important to note that certain projects are excluded. A large number of projects, for that matter, should be considered to be outside the shift process. These are what used to be considered committed projects. They've changed the definition a bit on that, but nonetheless, it's projects that are well underway. They probably should not be in shift 2022. Same for most maintenance projects. And then also real important for this committee is the recognition that dedicated funded projects, including the SLO funded projects, among other dedicated funding sources, those are outside of shift. So those should not be considered for sponsorship. So here we are. Here's our schedule. Like I said, it's been a crazy couple of weeks. We got the District 5's, their sponsorship. They provided those to us not too long ago. We met with the TTCC membership on the Kentucky side. We had meetings with folks from each county a couple weeks ago, and developed the list in each county, if you will, a list of priorities in each county. TTCC last week reviewed that list and made a recommendation of this committee to use that list of 49 projects for the sponsorships. Here we are today on April 22nd. We have to finalize our sponsorships, by the way, by May 14th. So we've got to get them in over the next couple of weeks to the Transportation Cabinet. And then beyond that, so the craziness might end around then. And then over the summer, if you will, projects will be, tinkered with in terms of the data verified, make sure the right data gets scored. And then later this summer, later this year, we'll come back to you guys. And as many of you all remember, we'll have to boost the projects where we give additional local points for projects that the TPC and KYTC District 5 would really like to see score higher. And then it all culminates in a highway plan that will be developed later this year by the Transportation Cabinet and approved next year by early next year in the General Assembly. This is from my last presentation, but I just want to mention it again that our approach this year has been to follow the past precedent from the prior versions of SHIFT, where we try to limit any sponsorships to those that are to projects that are in KIPTA's long range plan. And also, very importantly, we sponsored projects after KYTC does. That simplifies things tremendously for us. And what we used as guidance in those local meetings was our project rankings that were developed for our most recent long range plan update, Connecting Kentucky. So here, this is it in a bit of a nutshell, I suppose. This table shows the numbers that we're working with here, and the goal by the end of the day, and by May 14th anyways, is we've got to fill in those gold boxes there. And I'll explain here. I'll explain what this all means. Like I said, we're just talking about these three counties, and in these three counties, we had about 162 projects that were under consideration. Transportation Cabinet provided the MPOs and the ads around the state a list of projects that they were considering. KIPTA staff also added to that list for KIPTA MPO sponsorships for you guys to consider a subset of MTP projects. And the reason it was a subset, not the entire one, is based on what I was saying before. The SLO projects, maybe even projects that were simply bike or PED or transit projects. We know those aren't going to score well in SHIFT. There's really no reason to include those in SHIFT because SHIFT will not accommodate those in terms of a high scoring project. But keep in mind, there are other avenues for funding for those types of projects. The gray boxes toward the middle is the information that the Transportation Cabinet provided us with. They sponsored a total of 47 projects in the three KIPTA MPO counties. They also considered, KYTC considered 3 projects to be committed. This is a new term, committed, where I think it was about 40 projects statewide were committed. Two were in Bullitt, one was in Oldham. So those 47, those 3, those 50 move on to the scoring to the scoring ringer this summer, if you will. And so that left us with about 112 to consider. We know that we have 49 to work with, and that would bring the grand total to 99 projects. That is the 50 KYTC has sponsored or committed, plus the 49 that KYTC has allotted this body to sponsor. So jumping ahead a little bit to the results, we ended up with these red numbers here. The list of projects that were in the meeting packet or in the link in the meeting packet. We ended up on 8 projects in Bullitt County to be sponsored, 34 in Jefferson, and then 7 in Oldham. So just to maybe in place of going project by project, I created a slide for each county just to kind of go over the highlights here. So again, KYTC sponsored their projects before KIPTA did. So that made, like I said before, that made our lives a little bit easier here. So KYTC in Bullitt County sponsored a total of 9 projects. 2 projects were considered committed. That is the Kentucky 480 interchange improvements and a widening project on Kentucky 245. Those 11 projects had a cumulative total of $285 million in project costs. 5 of the projects were on I-65, 4 were on Kentucky 44, and those 2 projects I mentioned earlier. One thing to note here is that KYTC previously had a huge project in Bullock County that in essence spanned the entire county on I-65. They recently underwent a planning study, and as a product of that planning study, it broke that giant project into chunks that are more buildable or bite-sized chunks, even if you will. And so those projects were scored or will be scored independently in SHIFT and were considered for sponsorship in SHIFT. So that's why there's 5 projects in I-65 there, not maybe just one that you might be familiar with from our MTP, for example. So again, on the left, KYTC sponsorships. On the right, our sponsorships. There are 29 projects countywide to consider. The TTCC has recommended that 8 projects be sponsored in Bullock County. And through the meetings with the TTCC membership in Bullock County, what we heard loud and clearly was Kentucky 44, Kentucky 44, Kentucky 44, and then with a side of I-65. And so those are evident in the priorities here. 5 Kentucky 44 projects, in addition to the 4 that the state sponsored, and then 3 additional I-65 projects were sponsored. Moving on to Oldham County, same or similar process. We met with the folks, TTCC membership in Oldham County, and they even had a ranking ready for us. So that made things a lot easier for us. But here it is, kind of summarized here. The cabinet sponsored 7 projects. 1 was considered committed. It's a new interchange just south of LaGrange, south of the existing LaGrange exit, that is, on I-71. Those 8 projects in total were $210 million. And notably, there were 6 I-71 projects that effectively would represent not only a new interchange there, but a widening of I-71 through all the way from Gene Snyder in Jefferson County with the iMove project. If you count the iMove project, it was not one of the projects, by the way, but it would be a widened I-71 if all these projects were to come to fruition all the way out into Henry County. So KIPTA had there were a total of 25 projects to consider in Oldham County. TTCC recommendation was 7 would be from Oldham, representing $148 million in projects. And these were on the non-interstate routes. So several of the state highways, projects on those roads were considered for sponsorship. Jefferson County was a big one. Obviously, there were 108 projects countywide that were considered for SHIFT. So it was tricky to narrow those down. But the folks over at Louisville Metro and through our meetings with staff at St. Matthews and J-Town and Shively, Mayor Shively, was really helpful to get those narrowed down. The cabinet sponsored 31 projects in Jefferson County, representing $1 billion in project costs. 10 of them were interstate projects of the 31, and at least two, I noted, projects were sponsored on each of the 5 interstates that crisscross Jefferson County. The rest I kind of categorize as operational improvements. Widening a 2-lane road to a 3-lane road was what we saw a lot of, for sure. So in the KIPTA sponsorships, 34 were sponsored. A total of 34 projects were sponsored. An additional $581 million. The focus there on the KIPTA sponsorships, as I've got them listed here, was on the non-interstate routes. And again, the operational improvements. I think over half of the 34 projects that were sponsored, that are proposed to be sponsored by KIPTA TPC, they kind of fit the general category of a 3-lane widening with sidewalks, taking a 2-lane road, adding a center turn lane, and improving the bike and or pedestrian treatments on it. There's a huge number of those projects. Sum it all up, there were 99 projects, like I mentioned earlier, that represented $2.4 billion in project costs. And so I'm not here to tell you, and nor would I ever say that there's going to be $2.4 billion of projects in the next highway plan in the KIPTA region, not even close. Just for reference, there was about $740 million in the last highway plan in these 3 counties. So a little perspective there. We don't know how much will be in these 3 counties for certain. So, but again, this is a first cut. It's not a very deep first cut, and maybe these numbers help help to show that. About 80-20 split, non-interstates to interstates. As we move on, we did have a few projects that are considered inactive in the current long-range plan, so we'll get those figured out over the summer and see what needs to be done with those. Some of those were sponsored by Transportation Cabinet, and I think 2 were proposed to be sponsored by the TPC. So that will be something that we will have to make some changes. That would take an exception, if you will, to the rule of only sponsoring current MTP projects. Those projects, by the way, were in a past MTP, but they aren't in our current MTP. So they'd have to be reemerge at some point probably via an upcoming amendment. We'll get some of the project details cleaned up to meet the Transportation Cabinet standards. And then later this summer, I mentioned this is not a very deep cut. The deeper cut will be later this summer when the boosting of the projects comes around. So they'll be assigned a score. Each project will get a score. And then we'll have the opportunity to boost that score based on projects that the TPC TPC will have to pick their favorites in essence, and so will the Transportation Cabinet. And then again, this will all culminate in the highway plan later this year and then early next year. That's all I have. I'd be happy to take any questions. If we need to go over any projects individually, we can. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them or comments.
Hi, Andy. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No big deal. Quick question. Andy, the 80-20 split between non-interstate and interstate, was that based on number of projects for that split or funding amounts for the split?
It most definitely was not funding. It was the project number.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
There's some, as you know, there's some big price tags on a few of these.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for the summary. I appreciate, because I do think it helps sort of give a picture of the types of projects that are in the highway plan at the state and gives a little detail between the counties. So I appreciate that background. I was curious, kind of, you made mention that the bike ped or transit projects don't score well in the shift process. And I kind of remember a similar thread from the Lexington area MPO work where I was before. And I don't know that I am asking for like a reason why that is, but I think I would couch it in this term more as a comment generally about the shift process is, if there is a way for us to have a better understanding of the dollar value that we're spending on different types of projects, I think from a policy standpoint, that's important for this group to understand. And I appreciated Matt's question too about, an 80-20 split between non-interstate and interstate is good to know, but also if we're spending 20%, 20% of the projects are being spent on 50% of the dollars, that's also an important piece. So I don't really have a question, really more of a comment is, as we continue to talk about this, I would love to see a little bit more of a breakout of sort of the mode and the price or the cost of those projects. Maybe it's just for me to get better acquainted and kind of up to speed with the Louisville or, the KIPTA region projects. But I think it's important from a policy standpoint to understand, hey, we're spending this much money on this type of projects for this results. Do we want to think about it in a different way? So I just kind of a comment on that.
Yeah, if I can comment on your comment. We, in our conversations with some of the KYTC staff, let's say, that's in charge of shift, we've kind of had similar comments in that letting it be known that it for a number of reasons, some of which we're all very familiar with, it's this is a statewide process that doesn't perfectly fit, the big city issues. And so we've been given some amount of assurance that the formulas that are going to use that are in the works, perhaps for the next shift, will accommodate a few more of those types of things. That's what we've been told. We asked, we said, are there any changes to the formulas of note for shift 2022 versus shift 2020? There were some changes, but no major changes in that regard. No major bonus points if you had sidewalks or anything along that regard. But that is something that we are very cognizant of in our conversations, and we are letting that be known, when we have the opportunity to do so. And I think we will continue to do so. just that.
Thank you. And I will say, I think the shift process has been a tremendous step in the right direction. I love the analytical piece and that it does weigh different factors. I just think maybe there's other factors that could be given a little bit more weight. So I think I'm glad to see this process is continuing. So appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you for those that were in those local meetings. We kind of put those together on quick notice. So we do appreciate your help. It was extremely helpful.
Okay, any other questions for Andy?
Kevin, I'll just add, I appreciate Carrie's call for more transparency, more data, more information about how we're spending funds, and do want to mention that that is a primary goal, a primary reason that we're pursuing this new database, so that we can have that real-time, transparent, deep dive information about investment. So thank you, Carrie, for that. We're working on it.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, this is an item that does require committee action, so looking for a motion in a second, please.
So moved, Keith Griffey.
Second, Jim Urban.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye or raise your hand. All those opposed, same sign. That item is approved. Moving on to agenda item 9, connecting Kentuckyana 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. David.
Thank you. I'm going to get started sharing my screen. Elizabeth Fark and I are going to tag team this presentation. Can you all hear me okay? One second, I'll get started here. What we are continuing with this presentation is to give you an update of where we are with the Connecting Kentuckyana 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. It's very important that we keep the committees involved and appraised of where we are as we advance with the update. So what I want to do is just touch on a few things. Right now, we have several tasks that are underway and they're either completed or near completion. And then we have a couple of tasks that are on the horizon that we want to make sure you're aware of. The bicycle and pedestrian inventory, I think Adam has talked about that already. That is advancing. Elizabeth is going to touch base with you guys in just a few minutes on the results of our first public outreach activity. And we're continuing to look at how to use Streetlight for our analysis of congestion and delay and things along those lines. And Dane Hoskins is working with us right now on the CNP review. We have a congestion management process that we are required to have in place, and we're excited about retooling that a little bit for 2050. So with these 4 pieces, these have been taking up a lot of the time of staff, and everyone on staff has pretty much been involved at some point or another through these 4 pieces. Michaela Gary, who's also on staff, is working on our environmental justice update and our red flag inventory. And hopefully we'll be able to bring something to you about that here in the near future. Staff has been taking a look at the goals and objectives that we want to review and reviewing the 2040 so we can bring something to our working group in the coming months. And then Elizabeth Fark is continuing to lead our effort to update our bike and ped resource guide into an active transportation plan, more of a tool that we can use as we go forward into 2050. We are on schedule, and our timeline reflects that. We're just finishing up some of the existing and future conditions that we want to make sure that we have a good handle on. And we'll be starting the goals and performance measures here in the coming months. I do want to point out to you that in about 18 months, we want to start project development. Now it says 18 months, but the reality is that we could probably start, you and your staff could probably start taking a look at the projects that you have in the current 2040, and let's start a conversation. Let's start having those discussions about the types of improvements you might want to see going forward in 2050. So if you have an opportunity or would like to talk to KIPP staff more about this, go to our website and take a look at the projects that your organization, your agency is sponsoring. And we'd love to start chatting with you about how we envision the 2050 project development process unfolding, to make sure that everyone has plenty of time to get engaged and to be informed of the steps that we're going to be taking in order to bring projects together. So the bottom line on the updates to the schedule is that we're looking good. We're on schedule. And we're pretty excited with the things that we have completed so far and what we will be bringing to you again in the near future. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth Fark now, who's going to kind of go over with you the results of our first public outreach activity. Elizabeth, it's all yours.
Thank you, David. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. So we have wrapped up our first public outreach effort, and the goal of this was to identify the issues that our community is seeing around the region on the transportation network. So this took place in February and March. Like Greg said, we had really strong engagement. Considering everything had to be virtual, I would say I was blown away by the response, really. Over 16,000 impressions on social media. We reached out to over 3,000 people and organizations through email, met with the community groups that Greg mentioned, just such a wide range of people that we were able to have conversations with. And then those survey responses and the map comments were just well and above what we were expecting. So it was really great to see strong engagement right out of the gate to really help us formulate what do we need to plan for the community. Amanda, if you want to click to the next slide.
We're there.
Or David, sorry, forgot who was sharing. So just kind of boiling it down to some of what we heard, and I really encourage you to look at that report, dig into those comments, find what was said about your area, your county. But to boil it down, we saw strong support for alternative modes. So bike, walk, transit. People wanted those alternatives. Not saying that everyone wanted to give up their car, but they just wanted that option. They wanted to feel safe and comfortable on the roadway. So we did see that support, and that was good to see. Also, safety for all modes was a huge, especially in the survey responses. There's speeding on the roadways. There's dangerous drivers for when you are a bicyclist or a pedestrian. So some probably driver education needs were coming through. And then also just the infrastructure or the lack of infrastructure for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users, and for those trying to get to transit. Also, getting to work and employment was probably the third biggest need that we heard. A lot of people making the case for transit and economic development, for the need for people to have a reliable way and multiple ways to be able to get to work. Not everyone can afford a car. Not everyone wants a car. So making our region more accessible for employment needs. David, you can click on.
It should be there.
Oh, there we go. So why did we do this effort, and how will this input be used? Several different ways. The staff is currently reviewing and updating the goals and objectives, and David will be talking to you all about that next month for Connecting Kentucky in a 2050. How do we kind of tweak those to fit the vision as we go forward? Also looking at project development, the big picture, what are those kind of big picture needs that we heard? How are we putting those in goals and objectives? And how are the projects addressing those goals and objectives? And then small picture, in the evaluation, we, in the past, in 2040, used public comments as a way to earn points for those evaluations. We anticipate doing the same with this. So the nitty gritty, we need a stoplight here. If your project addresses that, you could get points in the evaluation. And then finally, other MPO planning activities. We use this commentary for the active transportation plan, for any updates to the freight plan, just a wide variety of activities. It really does help us frame why we are planning and who we are planning for. So that is the update. Like I said, I'll put the link to the report. It was in the meeting packet, but I'll link it to for you all, as well as a map where you all can explore the comments and see what we heard. Thank you very much.
That's pretty much all we have, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we'd be happy to entertain any questions or ideas that people may have. And you can look for these updates on a pretty regular basis. We're going to, like I said at the beginning, we want to make sure that the TPC and the TTCC are well informed and up to speed, so that you can continue to participate and we can pull this MTP together as we have talked about doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for David or Elizabeth? All right, that item was for information only, does not require any action. So thank you, staff, for your work on that. We appreciate it very much. Moving on, the Coronavirus Relief and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. Nick.
Yes, thank you all again. Let me know if I need to speak louder. So the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act was passed back in December. This is, I think it was the second major COVID stimulus act. I think we had the CARES Act and then the recent one, the American Rescue Plan. This specific act provided $10 billion in additional federal highway funding through what's called the Highway Infrastructure Program. This is a program that was established as part of the FAST Act. We've been receiving small allocations of funding every year in both Indiana and Kentucky for our MPO dedicated programs. And this allocation was much higher than it normally is. So as you can see, in Indiana, we received $1.2 million in federal funding, and in Kentucky, $7.9 million. Project eligibility for the HIP program, if you will, a Highway Infrastructure Program, not to be confused with the INFRA grant, is, can you go back one, Amanda? Project eligibility is essentially the same as the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, also known as the SLO program, in that almost any infrastructure project is eligible if it's on a federal aid highway, and for bike and pedestrian and transit projects, it does not obviously have to be on a federal aid eligible highway. But programs and planning studies are the two things that are not allowed. So I know we had some folks inquiring about increasing funding for different programs, education programs, and that's not eligible, unfortunately. The match requirements. So this program allows for the funds to be used at 100% federal with no match. Now, states have the authority, if you will, to determine whether they want to require a match. And NDOT has determined that they are requiring sponsors to provide a match. KYTC is not. A very important fact here is that these funds must be obligated or authorized by federal highways and USDOT no later than fiscal year 2024, which would be June 2024 for Indiana and September 2024 for Kentucky. The funds also have to be expended no later than fiscal year 2029, which sounds like it's way out there, but in the planning construction world, that's not that far. So because of that, we're really pushing folks to get these monies programmed on a sooner rather than later project phase. We do not feel, and this is all present a proposal essentially. TTC did approve this, but NDOT and KYTC received their own allocations of funding. I think KYTC received somewhere in the range of $140 million, and likewise for NDOT, they received their own. And then TARC, I think, has received at least 2 infusions of stimulus funds. So we felt it was most appropriate to focus on the locals here in the region. And so we had a discussion with both the Indiana folks and the Kentucky folks at our 2 project review meetings back at the beginning of April. The proposal, and Amanda, if you will, the proposal that we came up with, and Amanda created a distribution formula that everyone kind of agreed with, was let's distribute this money to our sponsors who currently have NPO dedicated projects in the works, and determine how much they will receive based on 50% weighted on the 2019 sponsor populations per the census.gov, and then the total NPO dedicated funds that are currently programmed between fiscal year 21 and 25, which will kind of reflect the amount of local investment via local match that these communities have been making. And that was received warmly by both sides of the river. In Indiana, there's some nuances here that I want to just kind of detail. These CRISA funds, so let me back up one step. In Indiana, because of the lack of funding we receive, sponsors typically overmatch. They provide more than 20% to be able to complete their projects. As such, there are existing projects in our programs that don't have enough federal funding that they need. So our intention is to primarily first try to make sure all of those projects are fully funded at 100% of what the need is, so that sponsors just have to provide that 20% and not go beyond it. And we will be requiring that these funds be programmed on a phase on or before fiscal year 2023. That way, if something happens and an obligation doesn't occur by the end of fiscal year 23, we have one more fiscal year to make sure those funds get obligated on something that can be obligated quickly. If a sponsor doesn't have a 2024 phase that requires funding, or sorry, they don't have a phase prior to 2024 that requires funding, we will work with them and program funds to a 2024 phase. Obviously, we're watching very closely to make sure there's no slippage on that project so that the region doesn't lose any funding. And then worst case scenario, if there's still funding left over after all current needs are met, then those funds will be made available via call for projects. Obviously, this isn't a whole lot of funds that would be left over, but we could add that to our next call for projects that we're planning for 2022. So that's kind of how it would work in Indiana. And obviously my memo in the attachment provides a lot more detail about this, but these are the highlights. In Kentucky, we have enough funding that we've been able to fully fund pretty much every project and every sponsor that has asked for funding. I think even with the last call, I think there was only like 2 or 3 projects we couldn't fund. So we thought, hey, the biggest need might be for local governments to save some local match. So what we're planning to do, the proposal is to take these CRISA funds that are 100% federal and swap them out with our 80-20 traditional SLO funds, if you will. And that would save sponsors about $1.5 million in local match, which obviously it could be greatly needed during this COVID pandemic that we've been in. And then all of those supplanted SLO funds or surface transportation funds would come back into the region, back into the pot, and be available for a call for projects next year. So that's kind of the proposal in a nutshell. The last slide essentially reflects how these funds would be distributed based on that formula. That's 50% population, 50% funds programmed. And so you would see on the left-hand side in Indiana, Clark County getting a little over 200,000. New Albany, I think, receiving the most at about 330,000. And then over in Kentucky, you have the amounts there for all of the sponsors. Obviously, U of L gets a smaller amount because they don't really have a dedicated population per se. So this is how the distribution would work, with your approval, of course. And I know the question will be, what are the next steps? And next steps pending TPC approval would be for myself to follow up with all the project sponsors listed here, identify which projects they want to either in Indiana add funds to, or in Kentucky supplant their traditional funding. And then next month, I would bring that back to you with the proposed funding awards of these, what they call CRISA. I'll stop there before I ask for action. Any comments, questions, concerns?
Thank you, Nick. Any questions for Nick?
All right. The action that I am requesting is, I believe, is to approve the funding distribution proposal for CRISA funds.
All right, need a motion and a second if I could, please.
So moved.
Second, Jim Urban.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Bernie, was that in the opposition? All right, that item is approved. Moving on, item 11, Nick, you're still up. This is the FY 2020 through 2015 TIP program.
Yes, we have a small administrative modification to present to you all today. Again, these are minor changes that don't require us to go through the more formal amendment process to the TIP and or MTP. I would say let me highlight real quickly one change from what was sent out in the packet. Pull this up. Exactly what it was. It was a KYTC project that came in earlier this week that is going to letting, and it is. My apologies. I just pulled up. It is the Kentucky 53 from I-71 to Crystal Drive and I-71 southbound ramps. This is a CMAQ project that we needed to add in there, or we essentially just switched the funding from fiscal year 20 to 2021 because they're about to go out for letting. Another notable project is a new project from KYTC, I think in partnership with Metro, which is some safety improvements, kind of streetscape, complete streets, if you will, to Bardstown Road between Broadway and Eastern Parkway. There's a new vehicle purchase for LaGrange via TARP, and there's a couple others that are just kind of minor tweaks to existing projects. But if there's any questions about any of these, I can definitely address those. But I did want to highlight that one new project that wasn't sent out originally in your packet. There's no action on this. It's just for information only. All right, thank you.
And our chair had to step away for a minute, but I believe if there's no discussion on that, I believe that's it, guys. Does anybody have anything for other business?
I was just going to mention, Amanda, just to reiterate the RAISE grant opportunity that was mentioned earlier. It was Tiger, then it was Build, and now it's RAISE. So the RAISE grant fund is out there. We have information on our TIP page and our portal about that grant opportunity that local LPAs and whatnot may be interested in applying for.
Nick, I'm curious, can you say what the acronym stands for?
Read off the top of my head, I can't. It starts with rebuilding.
I'll look it up.
rebuilding- I bet it's like rebuilding American infrastructure, something along those lines. But I don't have it off the top of my head. Good question.
Thank you.
But
Rebuilding
yeah. I was going to say sustainability and equity if I had to guess.
Yes, rebuilding American infrastructure with sustainability and equity raise. And guys, as always, if you are pursuing those, feel free to reach out. Andy'd be happy to provide streetlight data. Hopefully he's nodding. We're happy to help review in any way that we can help you. We're glad to do so. I don't think your chairman's back yet. So it would be my honor, guys. Thank you. Thanks for continued excellent support all through COVID. We couldn't ask for better committee, but it would be my privilege to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second, Bernie.
Thank you. See you guys. See you at board.